Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the January meeting of the BSA Codes Committee. We are joined today by Minaj Nair, a fastening and protection field engineer from Hilti, and Chris Arrington, a fire protection specialist also with Hilti. They're going to be talking to us today about fire stopping special inspections. If you open up the chat menu, I have posted a continuing education link. If you are a BSA AIA member, please just give us your name and your membership number. If you are not an AIA or BSA member, please provide us with your name and your email address. Sorry, I appear to have been muted. We're going to then need for a non-BSA member, we're going to just need your name and your email address for you to get a continuing education certificate giving you credit for today's meeting. If you have questions, please post them in the chat, either to me or to any of the other co-chairs. And then at the end of the presentation, as long as we can maintain decorum, we have no problem opening up the microphones to anyone that wants to ask questions directly. So with that, Minaj, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. As Andrew mentioned, my name is Minaj Nair. I'm the fastening and protection field engineer for Hilti. The region I cover specifically is New England, so Rhode Island, Western Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine. On the call as well, we have Chris Allington, our fire protection specialist. Chris, if you want to give a quick introduction about yourself.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Again, my name is Chris Allington. I've been with Hilti for 25 years now, and I know I do a lot of training and education on stuff on projects. With all the group members and stuff like that. So the main thing, I follow the code guidelines. So I think I'll have an option or an opportunity to talk about a few things during the presentation as well. So I'll cover that as well. So again, thank you for your time, Chris Allington.
Perfect. And Chris, I saw in the chat that you mentioned Wayne, the special inspector, is trying to join. Was he able to join? Or is he still having
Yes, I'm here.
I think he's on there. He did finally get on. Yep.
Perfect. Wayne, if you don't mind just giving a brief introduction about yourself as well, we're really excited to have you here.
Sure.
Yeah.
I have started in Vericon, a passive fire protection firm, back in 2012. Prior to that, I was a Firestop contractor. Prior to that, I was a manufacturer's rep for Hilti. That's where I got into fire stopping. In the last 12 years, I think right now we've inspected over 200 projects and about $12 billion worth of construction.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Wayne. Actually, didn't even know you're with Hilti before, so that's cool to see another Hilti family member on the call. But yeah, as we mentioned, and as you see on the screen here, today's topic is going to be about special inspections for fire stopping specifically. As was mentioned before by Andrew, this is an AIA accredited course. So just go ahead and fill out that information and I'll be able to take care of this credit for you guys. If you guys have any questions with receiving the credit or there are any problems with that, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Tarek or Andrew will be able to help you out with that. My contact information will be at the end of the presentation, but I'll also drop it in the chat below, the chat in the Zoom call. So just let me know if you guys have any questions. So starting off, really, these are the key points that we want you guys to walk away understanding from today's presentation. So there's going to be a very similar slide at the end called summary, really, again, summarizing these specific topics and giving you a really brief understanding of what you should take away. But if you guys have any questions or you feel like something here wasn't answered, or maybe we just didn't go into enough detail about anything specifically, don't hesitate to just let us know. Again, drop your question in the chat. There's going to be a few points or moments across the presentation. We'll just take a quick moment to see if there are any questions. I'm also going to be just speaking up and asking questions. I love interactive presentations. I think it's a good way for everyone to absorb the information. So feel free to hop off mute briefly. I know it can be kind of tricky in Zoom calls, people talking over each other. No rush for time. So, if I ask any questions along the way, don't be shy, please speak up. But again, really excited to present to you guys today, and we'll go ahead and dive in. Really at a high level, what exactly is a special inspection? Can anyone tell me an experience they've had with a special inspection or just your general understanding of what a special inspection is? No? All right, no worries. We can keep rolling with it. By the way, if I keep looking over to my right, my screen's here. This is where you guys are. So my eyes might be darting here and there a couple of times. So
Hey, Manoj, just a real quick thing. Again, the very good thing about third-party inspection, and again, Wayne will be involved as well to explain this. It's great because, again, the whole code requirement, we want to make sure that everybody's installing systems 100% correct. So that's the key thing, and that's where code red, third-party inspection, Vericon, all these companies that do this, they're going to be actually involved with this. So he'll get involved with this and answer any questions as well. So again, anything on this, keep us posted.
perfect. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, very good point. Everything's about systems, and we'll kind of dive into that a little later in the presentation. So as it says here, special inspections are specifically for elements or applications that are extremely critical or complex. So generally, the authority having jurisdiction is going to carry out inspections for the project, but with certain applications or elements of the project that require the inspector to have really in-depth knowledge and experience about that application or element, that's exactly where the special inspectors or third-party inspection agencies come in. So the authority having jurisdiction is still a key member when it comes to choosing the special inspector or the special inspection agency. However, they're not going to be the ones actually carrying out the inspection. I'm going to be saying inspection, special inspection throughout the presentation. It's going to be a bit of a tongue twister, but I'm always going to be referring to the special inspection that the whole presentation is about in general. So special inspections are mandated within the code, within Chapter 17, and there are various different types. We like to split them up into kind of 3 high-level types. One of them being just ensuring that the building and the location that the building is built on is structurally sound. So that's going to be special inspections for what you see here on the left-hand side. Then we're going to be having special inspections to ensure that the building can resist the various loads that it's expected to endure throughout its lifetime. And as you see here, that's going to be these 2, wind resistance and seismic resistance, depending on location. And lastly, we have really what's going to be our main conversation point for today is how exactly does the building react in the event of a fire within the building. So more specifically, this last section, special inspection of fire stopping. However, there are inspections for smoke control or intermediate fire resistant steel coatings as well. And that's something that Hilti covers and has products for and information for as well. So if you guys ever come across any questions for fire resistant steel coating, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Chris as well, and we'll be able to help you with any questions. We actually have personnel specifically for steel coatings as well. So this is really just a slide to show you what the different versions of adoptions are in terms of the IBC code. This is slightly outdated. This came out from last year, so this might be need some updates, just a heads up. But really the main takeaway from this slide is to show you that fire stopping was introduced into the code in 2012, Chapter 17 in 2012. And the majority of the states on here, I believe except for one, New Hampshire right over here, have accepted or adopted the IBC code version of 2012 to 2018. So this is going to be a relevant conversation and talking point for the majority, I would say, of the projects that you guys work on. And if you have any questions on that, again, definitely let me know. I'd be more than happy to see whether this is a relevant topic or not for your project type. So for federal and or government buildings, there's going to be some specific guides or verbiage for that. However, it's going to be fairly similar to what you see in IBC 2015. So in terms of the requirements for a special inspector, they're going to have a similar verbiage of needing similar experience in terms of actual work experience, as well as having the proper education and certification. So we'll be talking a little later in the presentation. Really, the last section of the presentation is going to be about the certification process and all the content that goes with it. But really the main thing to take away, and again, what we'll be diving into a little deeper later in the presentation, is what are those exact requirements that ASTM standards have that the inspector needs to be able to fulfill. So we talked about, what exactly is the special inspection, what that entails, who's going to be involved. Now we're going to be talking about what type of projects actually require the special inspections. So this is called out again in chapter 17, and more specifically section 1705-17, as you see here on the left-hand side. Sorry, my mouth is getting really dry. I don't know if it's this cold weather, but I'm going to take a couple of water breaks every here and there. So this is a bit of a meaty bullet point. Really, the best way I've been able to approach it is splitting it up into two sections. So first, you have the first section talking about the building types that are going to require these special inspections. And then you have the actual application types, basically from this red laser after that. And we're going to actually focus on the second section first. So as it says here, special inspections for through penetrations, membrane penetration, fire stops, fire-resistant joint systems, and perimeter fire barrier systems that are tested and listed in accordance with sections 714 and 715. And as you see, the specific sections right here. All of those system types must be in accordance with section 1705.7.1 and 1705.7.2. So again, a lot of verbiage. What does this actually mean? So in short, what this is saying is, if the code is going to require a fire stop system to be in place for a specific application, then that system is subject to a special inspection if that building is subject to a special inspection. So again, we're going to be diving into what type of buildings require these special inspections. But again, the main thing that you want to take away from the slide is if the code requires a fire stop system to be there, it's with one of these application types you see here, then it is subject to that special inspection. Now, what Chris said earlier about ensuring that the fire stop systems are installed correctly and are up to code, this is really where it comes into play. Now, this presentation, and one thing to note is, especially when we talk a lot about the education of the fire stop special inspector and what those requirements are, it can kind of seem like, hey, this is something that the contractor should be aware of, and this is something that they should definitely be aware of. But the key thing to note is that as a specifier, you have influence to make sure that this process goes as smoothly as possible when it comes to the installation of the actual fire stop systems, but also the inspection. You're able to influence by giving specific systems that they need to follow with systems that have very easy, straightforward installation that also make the processes of the inspection go by more smoothly. And we'll talk about those specific inspections and examples of that later in the presentation. But again, it's really just important to know that you guys have great influence on that. So again, just a quick recap, the code requires a fire stop system to be there. It is then subject to that special inspection. So now we'll go ahead and talk about the first section of this bullet point here. In high-rise buildings or in buildings assigned to risk category 3 or 4. So can anyone tell me the general definition of what makes a building a high-rise building?
"75 feet, if I remember right."
Yep, that's exactly right. So a high-rise building is a building with occupied floor located more than 75 feet above the lowest level of fire department vehicle access. Kind of a trick question, just because I believe in Massachusetts it's actually 70 feet. So correct answer, I think it is Andrew, right? But I believe in Massachusetts it is 70 feet. So just
and
want
to give credit in the chat, Jason Arndt put 70 feet ? In Massachusetts just before you said it. So
really? Okay, all right.
We'll
you
give
got
10
it.
points
So
to Gryffindor.
I love it. So perfect. But correct answer again. The reason for this is if there is a fire that breaks out, and really the key word here is an occupied floor located more than 70 or 75 feet above the lowest level fire department vehicle access. If it's more than that, the firefighters actually need to go inside the building, to save occupants and help them safely exit the building. So it's important that the ratings of the various walls and really the containment of the fire is of a higher quality and as best as possible, so they have enough time to get in and out of the building and get the occupants in and out of the building. Excuse me. Any questions so far on this? Again, I know it's a really meaty topic. We're going to be going into the next two types of buildings that are going to require special inspections. But any questions so far?
No additional questions in the chat. Eric Peterson added 70 feet to the roof in Massachusetts, 75 feet to the top floor in IBC. Just another
Okay.
nuanced distinction.
Perfect. Thanks, Eric. I appreciate that. Helps a lot. Awesome. No other questions. We'll go ahead and keep rolling. So as we said, high-rise buildings, risk category 3 and risk category 4 buildings. As it states here, risk category 3 is going to be any type of building that represents a substantial hazard to human life in the event of a failure. So as you can imagine, these are going to be buildings like public assemblies, schools, emergency treatment facilities, prisons, the list goes on, and then any sort of building with an occupancy load of more than 5,000 occupants. In addition to that, as you see here, you have power generating stations, and then any sort of building that's not included within risk category 4 that has toxic or explosive materials. So really, as you can imagine, we just want to make sure that these buildings with a large number of occupants are up to standard and have fire stop systems that are being installed correctly. And really the trend that you're going to see across these various bullet points and slides are you want the installation of the system to be up to code compliant, but just accurate and consistent. And so when we talk about the new technologies within the fire stop industry a little later, that's really going to become a key word: consistent and accurate installation. So as I said, we'll touch on it a little later. But next we have risk category 4 buildings. So these are going to be, as you see here, buildings that are designated as essential facilities. Now, I generally like to look at these as the buildings that our community relies on, whether it's day-to-day or if a natural disaster is to occur. So those are going to be buildings such as emergency treatment facilities, police stations, emergency shelters, communications and operations facilities. The list goes on. Again, power generating stations for public utilities, control towers, etc. Again, really the places that our communities rely on. So it is our responsibility to ensure that we're installing the correct, accurate fire stop system, code compliant fire stop system, and that it's actually going to work in the event of a fire in one of these areas. It's a little tricky because obviously, we're designing for something that is a worst case scenario, but when that worst case scenario happens, it's extremely important because the lives of our communities are in our hands in a way. So again, it's really important that we're making the right decisions, trying to be as accurate as consistent as possible. So any questions so far on these various topics? I don't see anything in the chat, so I think we're good to go.
You're good.
So we'll go ahead and roll into the actual requirements of this general inspections. So as you can imagine, the agency for this special inspection cannot have any sort of conflicts of interest with the actual installers or contractors. You're going to see this word a few times in this presentation: approved agency. What this really means is this agency has been approved by the authority having jurisdiction. So I mentioned earlier that the authority having jurisdiction doesn't actually carry out these special inspections, but they're a key player when determining who's going to be carrying out. So they're actually going to get very similar to a submittal from the owner or the owner's representative who is proposing the special inspector agency. And they're going to take a look at their credentials, again, whether it's experience or specific certifications, and make that judgment on whether they're the appropriate person to carry out that special inspection. As you can imagine, the personnel within this approved agency has to have that appropriate background and experience as well. So who exactly is writing the check for the special inspection? As it says here in red, the owner or the owner's authorized agent is going to be the one paying for the special inspection. And really another key thing to note is that the smoother this process goes, the less time this process takes in terms of the special inspection, the less the owner is going to have to pay for it. So again, the influence you have as a specifier, selecting the appropriate systems, using the latest technologies when it comes to fire stopping, that special inspection process is going to go by more smoothly accordingly, and potentially saving the owner money and just general headaches. I know from some specifiers I've spoke to in the past, RFIs can be used as a metric. Generally you want to have less RFIs per project. Obviously, we know as life is, things happen on site and EJs come up. It's just kind of the way of the world. But if you're able to select Firestop systems early on in the process and have those just communicated to the contractor, you can kind of control what type of products or what type of technology is used to ensure that process is going very smoothly. So we talked a lot about the actual process of getting the inspector on, and I've mentioned just experience and qualifications, but there are actually specific ASTM standards that call out these qualifications, and that's going to be here: the competence and relevance, competence and relevant experience or training for special inspectors, as well as related complexity to the same type of special inspection or testing activities for projects of similar complexity and material qualities. So what exactly does that mean? Again, this kind of gets a little wordy, but what it's saying is the inspector carrying out this inspection, say for a specific project type, has to have relevant experience. Say, for example, if they've been doing, schools, inspecting schools for fire stopping their entire career, and then maybe they're proposed to do something like a manufacturing plant or a power plant, they may not have that relevant experience to know what to look for, based on the applications that are commonly seen there. So it's really important that the special inspector being called out does have that relevant experience. In addition to an inspection agency, as it says here, design professional can be responsible or involved within that process, but they still need that similar requirements and qualifications. So I mentioned in the previous slide that there are specific ASTM standards that call out these requirements. They are, as you see here, ASTM E2174 and ASTM E2393. So again, off the bat, acceptable by the AHJ, kind of a no-brainer at this point. They're going to need to make sure that they're qualified. And these are some of the qualifications that they're going to look at. As you can see at the end of these are all ors, so it can be one or the other. Meeting certain criteria, you'll see the standard a little later in the presentation. Minimum 2 years of inspection experience or of being a part of a quality assurance agency. We'll talk about what that is a little later in the presentation, but really at a high level, it's an agency that has been accredited for special inspections, and they really get that by having personnel that have the appropriate qualifications. Again, as I mentioned earlier, no conflicts of interest. So the special inspector cannot have any sort of competition with the contractor who did this fire stop installations throughout the project, and they must generally just be completely independent of them. Again, kind of a bit of a no-brainer. There just can't be any conflict of interest as in normal projects. So in addition to that, there is an inspector qualification standard, fairly similar to what we saw before. These are the prerequisites on the right-hand side of the screen. Minimum experience within the industry, construction industry, as well as fire stop industry specifically. Minimum experience conducting quality control, minimum experience when it comes to selection or installation of fire stopping. As you can see, this resonates very similarly to what Wayne said his experience is, working with Hilti as a manufacturer rep, working for a contractor, and now doing the special inspections and carrying them out himself. Lastly, you have the option for holding a license as a registered design professional, as I mentioned a little earlier in the presentation. So how exactly is this inspection conducted? I'm going to read these brief bullet points, but Wayne, if you can, I'd like you to jump in afterwards and kind of give us a rundown of what that process looks like. So as I mentioned earlier, the two sections that are going to call out the different applications that are part of these special inspections are seen here. It's going to be for penetration fire stopping, as well as fire resistant joint fire stopping. These two standards at the bottom, ASTM E2174 and E2393, are going to call out these processes as well. So again, approved agency needs to be in accordance with those. But yeah, Wayne, I'll go ahead and hand it off to you if you just want to talk about your experience.
Well, let me probably keep it as simple as possible by talking about the two standards. Both of these standards have been around. Well, 2174 first was published in 2001. I think 2393 came out in 2004. 2174 says that you must conduct, there's two options, and really only one of them works. The two options are to do installation observation, which says that you have to observe the actual installation of the Firestop system for 10% of all the Firestops on a project, and you have to do that randomly. In 2001, the initial group that put this together, this was all very new, and it seemed like a feasible thing. It is definitely not a feasible way of conducting an inspection. It would be insanely time consuming and cost prohibitive to be able to spend that much time on a project, not to mention all the coordination. So the really only viable option is to do post-installation destructive testing. And there, for every system that gets installed, you have to conduct destructive testing for minimum 2% of that each system per 10,000 square foot of any floor. We work basically in 10,000 square foot zones. If a floor isn't that big, then you're just talking about all the systems on a particular floor. The 2% number is pretty small. If you figure 2% of 100 is 2. I can't speak for other firms, but we generally end up doing destructive testing on maybe 4 to 5% if things are going well. If things are not going well and we're doing destructive testing, then we get to a 10% failure rate of any particular system or of any particular trade. If the subs are installing their own, then inspection of that trade or that system stops. The installer has to fix all the items that failed. And they also have to self-inspect all the other installations of that system. You get to a 10% failure rate of any particular system or trade, and you were to actually continue on, you would probably end up failing 9 out of every 10 of that installation. This number has been borne out over the years with our internal tracking with other companies across the country like ours. 10% failure rate of any particular system is extremely high. So that's a bad thing when you get to that number. You get into joints as opposed to penetrations. Joints are a little bit different in that you're required to do destructive testing on a minimum one time of every 500 lineal feet of a particular system. Again, that was what was built into the original standard, and it is a little challenging to try to match up with that. We end up doing a little bit more than just once, depending on the application. If it's say a head of wall system where they're doing what we call a stuff and spray application, the system is mineral wool and an elastomeric spray and flutes and things like that, that's a little bit easier to do a smaller number. But if it's a caulk only system, and like if they've castle cut the gypsum wallboard to the shape of the flutes, just doing one section for say 100 or 200 feet of head of wall joint, it really doesn't give you a good idea of what's going on up there. So you have to go a little bit more. So the two standards set minimums, but once you get into the field, it's easy to recognize that you do need to exceed those a little bit. Again, if you start to get into a high deficiency rate, 8, 9, 10%, that's where things start getting kind of rough. Those are the two basic systems. Again, probably the biggest thing is in those two standards. I'm on both the 2174 and the 2393 committees, the oversight and the revision committees, and there's been attempts to try to make these a little more realistic. But one of the biggest things that it's a challenge to come up with an alternative is this idea of installation observation. I know there are some firms that say they do post-installation observation, and that's not really an option. There's a lot of fire stopping that we've looked at that on the surface looks nice and pretty and looks good. But as soon as you do destructive testing, you find out the sealant depth is insufficient, the inner space is too big, a lot of things that you can't visually assess without doing the destructive testing.
Awesome.
Any questions on that?
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Wayne. I think that was really informative, even for myself. Learned a couple things, like you said. Sometimes you don't even do just 2% of those penetration fire stopping destructive testing. So you can go 4 to 5%, which is really going to be relevant to the next thing I was going to roll to before we go into the next slide. And I'd like to get some of your input on this as well, Wayne. So I've mentioned a couple of times that there's new technologies within the fire stop industry. So that being something that's called preformed devices. It's relatively new, not like I'd say hasn't come out in the past couple months. It's been around for a little while, but a lot of people still aren't aware of the technology. I'll be showing some examples later in the presentation of what that looks like. I'll show you guys just one right now. Again, I'm going to be showing a Hilti example of it, but this is just a general technology within the fire stop industry. So when we talk about things like destructive testing, it's required, and correct me if I say anything incorrectly, by the way, Wayne. It's really about understanding whether that fire stop system has been installed correctly and it appropriately matches all the specifics that are called out in the detail. So when you get a fire stop system, it's going to show you, different views of that specific system, what all the components that are involved. So if you have a pipe going through the wall, it's going to be the pipe diameters. If it's multiple pipes or just one, you're going to have the wall details, you're going to have the material of the pipe, etc. So when you drill a hole through a wall, it now loses that rating. Say it was a 2-hour rating, now you want to run a pipe through it. To restore that rating in a traditional method, what you would do is install mineral wool around the annular space of that pipe, and you would put some sort of fire stop product, whether it be a sealant or spray. That's all going to be called out within the fire stop system, and it needs to be followed to a T to that. However, with preformed devices, which is the newer technology of fire stopping, instead of having to actually apply that fire stop product to being a spray or a sealant and having an amount of mineral wool that you need to compress and install, you actually have a product that has all the fire stopping material in it. So another example that Wayne mentioned was for top of wall applications. So that's what I have an example of here today. This one's going to be specifically for top track. So basically, if you're having a track and you're going to be attaching this to a flat floor ceiling, and you want to be able to fire stop the space in between the track and the ceiling, right? So again, generally a traditional method would be using mineral wool as well as sealant or spray. In this case, with the preformed device, what you actually have is just a component with that fire stopping material in here. And I'm sorry, over video, it's a little difficult to see, but this right here is the set amount of material, and it's going to act the same exact way that it would if you had that mineral wool and fire stop product. So say again, you have your track, for example, what you would pretty much do is put this product on top of the track, and you just shoot the track directly into the ceiling. So again, there's going to be different options depending on the manufacturer, but the overall concept is easier installation as well as having the set amount of product. Because when you're using a preformed device, you actually don't need to do the destructive testing, because the overall purpose of destructive testing is to ensure that the right amount of material has been applied. But when that's consistent with a preformed device, and you have these for cable conduits going through walls, pipes going through floors, ceilings, walls, etc., as well as an application like this for top track, you're able to have that consistent amount of fire stopping material. Now, Wayne, a question for you is, have you seen projects going traditional method versus using preformed devices? And have you seen a benefit with that when it comes to the process of a special inspection?
Oh, absolutely. There's still a number of variables that an installer might not get right with some of the preformed devices or the preformed products like the TTS, but it's certainly I'd say it dramatically decreases the odds that they're going to, that the installation is going to fail. I know from an inspection standpoint, it makes our life a little bit easier. Not that that's a high concern, but we're able to move through a project a little bit quicker. The more of the preformed devices they have in place, especially something like head of wall with the TTS and other technologies like that, because it becomes then more of a visual assessment, and you're not conducting destructive testing. We may not have to get up on ladders quite as often to get close to it. We can assess from the floor. So those types of technologies are going to make the building safer. It's going to be easier on installation. It's going to be easier on inspection. Inspections are going to go smoother. We're not failing as much stuff, which is going to decrease the number of re-inspections we have to do, which is going to allow the project to move forward smoother and faster, where things can go ahead and be concealed behind gypsum wallboard and whatnot. Whereas once something fails, that has to remain accessible for further inspection until it passes. So it's a lot of advantage to all the technology that's out there as far as the preformed devices go.
Awesome. Really good points. And again, thanks for the input, Wayne. We'll go ahead and roll into the next slide and really topics that you had brought up of the actual inspection process. So as you mentioned, statistical sampling, that's very similar to destructive testing. Really, again, making sure that you have the right amount of mineral wool as well as Firestop product, whether it's sealant or spray. In addition to that, verifying the materials prior to installation. The next one, again, a really important one, verifying against listed systems and or EJs. Again, you might be able to speak on this as well, Wayne. When you're inspecting a specific system, from my understanding, you take the physical system that's been submitted and approved, correct? And then you speak on, or you compare that to the actual installed system to make sure they're correct and both are code compliant.
That's correct. And this is one of the things that I guess we kind of pound on this again and again. A lot of GCs and your traditional subs are not used to this process. They have rarely, if ever, had their Firestop installation fail in the past. The building officials, vast majority of them will readily admit that even if they had the depth of knowledge they need to be able to inspect this, they don't have the time. Again, just speaking for Vericon, we're typically on site about 6 hours for an inspection, given your average commercial project. Sometimes it's a little as 4, but rarely less than that. And to be able to go through all these things, hit the numbers in terms of the percentage of destructive testing we have to do. And then we're doing a lot of review in the office before we get on site of the systems and EJs. We set things up so that the submittals are coming in and we're first in the approval process. We work with the building officials very closely because we're an extension of them, so that we get these systems in, we approve them, or if we know there's a problem with just particularly with EJs, we'll kick them back for revision. And then once on site, what we try to get across to the subs and the GCs is what we're inspecting against is just the verbiage in the system. We're not making anything up. We're not adding anything to it. We can't accept anything less. It's exactly what the system says, and the words are very clear for the most part. They're in black and white. They're not used to reading and carefully following the systems like this, which is one of the big reasons that Firestop got pushed into special inspection by the ICC. But the name of my company is Vericon. We verify conformance. So it's not some subjective standard that your inspectors are making up. A lot of times the subs and GCs kind of feel that way, only because they haven't encountered it before. But it's those first 3 items there, and then verifying just that everything is installed. A lot of stuff gets missed. And you can point it out, they can take care of it and keep the project going.
Great. Thanks so much again, Wayne. Really building on what he had mentioned. Again, these are the two standards that call out these practices and those requirements. As was said, witness 10% of installations or destructive testing of 2% of those installations. As Wayne mentioned earlier, it could be up to 4 or 5% of that as well. It's very similarly for joint systems, witnessing 5% of the linear feet being installed or destructive testing of 1 foot per every 500 feet. Again, if you're using preformed devices, then you actually don't need to do the destructive testing. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this, and again, where you as an architect have the influence on this, is for one, calling out specific preformed devices in the specifications. It's one way of influencing it. And another is providing a fire stop schedule for that specific project. So again, I mentioned earlier that EJs come up, it's just a part of life, and they need to be dealt with on site. However, there are a lot of general applications that can be seen across a project. And so being able to call out the specific systems that utilize preformed devices and using that and submitting that to the contractors and having the subcontractors use that gives you a little more control in the consistency of the installation and the quality of the installation. Now I want to pass it on to Chris, our fire protection specialist. Again, he has immense amount of experience in the field. So I wanted to talk through really what he sees in the field in terms of the benefits and what this inspection process looks like from his end.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay now?
Hear you just fine.
All right, perfect. And then is it possible, how do I share my screen on this? Because again, I always do team meetings. I don't do the this thing too much, but how can I share my screen?
All right. Normally, the easiest way is to make you into a co-host.
Oh, there we go.
Where sharing mine, and it'll be an option then for him.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the different areas to see if I could just sign on to this.
Why am I not seeing you?
Manoj, I think you'll need to stop sharing your screen also.
Okay, done.
Yeah, Manoj, you're off.
Okay, here we go. Let's see if we can make a co-host. All right, try it now.
Okay, what do I do? What do I hit?
On the bottom of the screen, there should be something that says share screen. Little arrow pointing up.
Got it. Got it. Perfect.
So yeah, should be click that and then follow the directions.
Hopefully I'm doing this. Wait a minute. Why is this?
You should see all of your different options that pop up, and you can just select the one that you want to show us.
That's what I'm trying to search. This is interesting. How do I find?
If you already have it opened.
Oh,
There we go. Now I can see your screen.
Now you can see this. All right. So can everybody see this right here?
Yes,
we can see, yep, an email.
we're seeing an email.
It's an email?
It looks like an email to Matt Baker.
No. How do I do this? So because again, I don't want to tie you guys up on time here. Why is this? I've got a presentation on here right now.
Do you have multiple screens on your computer?
Oh yeah.
I think you shared the wrong screen. If it's easier, grab what's on the other screen and just move it onto this one and switch them.
Yeah, that's what I'm. But again, I get. Yeah, let me do this. I just stopped share. Let me share again. When
should give you a choice of which screen to present.
Yeah, but what I did was when I clicked this, share the screen, there it is. Okay. Hopefully this works. All right, can everybody see that now?
It's loading. Yes, Hilti International
go.
Building Code. We can see it.
There we go. Okay. Yeah. And again, this is stuff that that Manoj probably already kind of went through most of everything. I just wanted to cover a couple quick things on this, on my presentation part. Again, you saw all this information that's listed right here. This is all the code requirements. And as mentioned, there's the third-party inspection information down below, which he already talked about. The main reason that I like to talk about this, and when I do the training, and I work with Wayne quite a bit on a lot of projects and stuff like that. He does a great job. Biggest thing, a lot of people just install Firestop material. Can anybody tell me what the rating of a Firestop product is? I needed an answer from
I mean,
someone.
I mean, it seems like a silly question. It depends on what wall you're sealing. It's
Okay,
not one size fits all.
Well, again, correct. So when I always bring up this point about Firestop products, products are not rated. You have to make sure you install a system. And that's why it's so important when on specs and stuff like that. If you notice this right here, does everybody see this detail? This is an example of a detail of a through wall penetration. And notice it has a number assigned to it. It's a nomenclature from UL, Underwriter Laboratory. So when they do the burn test and the hose stream test, they have to approve what manufacturer's product was actually used. And you'll notice it's listed there. And if you notice the numbers, notice WL1054, the number W, if you read the actual terminology here, penetrations, W stands for wall, the letter L stands for a gypsum wall, and then the number 1000 means that you're dealing with a bare metal pipe, and then it shows you all the information on how to fire stop that according to plan. So this is the most important thing when I do the training on everybody. I make sure that they follow the guidelines, because if somebody just squirts red stuff in a hole, they're no good. And a joint, same thing. That's why we have to make sure everybody has to follow what a guideline is of UL detail. And he already covered all this information. So again, I don't need to go through this again. This right here is an example, and exactly to what Wayne just mentioned. Here's an example of penetrations when they do the third-party inspection. They'll actually cut out the samples. That's the 2% destructive testing minimum to make sure that the installation of the products are getting done 100% correct. Does everybody see that? I just want to make sure I can show how this actually looks. And to the other point, he also brought up the point about joints. And if you notice this right here, see the actual joint requirements. It calls out a certain 1 foot cutting of a sample to verify that the joint meets what the actual requirement is. And you'll notice this, another key thing, what mineral wool has to be installed? A lot of times when somebody does a joint application, if they install mineral wool, it calls out 4 PCF insulation. Does everybody know what that means? 4 PCF is pounds per cubic foot. Sometimes if somebody doesn't put the right compression or the right mineral wool in here, that's where they're going to fail, because it doesn't meet the requirement, because they have to have a deflection capability of the floor above. So for joints, it's very important to make sure that people are following that guideline. To the point that Manoj and they already talked about the what do you call it? The preformed products like the TTS product and stuff like that. That's just an example. Anything that's preformed, that also helps out, because now they don't have to worry about putting in a certain, compression of this mineral wool if they're going to go that route. Again, just options. I just want to make sure everybody gets that. And then when they do the inspection, I'm just sure if Wayne wants to talk about any of this stuff right here, they do certain areas exceeding up to 10,000 square feet. They'll actually do certain sections of those third-party inspections. And if there's failures, like Wayne already mentioned, this is all the information that I give everybody the code guidance on. If there's a failure, all right, that's going to hold up the project. And that means that walls can't go back up anymore. Things can't go. So it's going to hold up time on this. So it's very good to make sure that we meet these descriptions of these installations. This right here is an example of some of the penetrations that were fire stopped. And if you notice, a lot of times, I don't know if it's not a code requirement, but a lot of times maybe in your specs, you might call out that the fire stopping needs to have a system number assigned to it. This is just an example. I just want to show this. The reason I show this is a sample that shows what the UL system number is, what the fire stopping is. And when the inspector reads this, they're going to go through and make sure that they verify what the depth of product is and how it's installed. One thing I will bring up, all right, let's say this is a rated wall. And if you notice all the gypsum that's installed, did they mud and tape the actual butt joints of all this yet? No. And that could be an issue, because now if somebody fire stops this before the wall is finished, because again, you want to make sure that the UL wall details are constructed properly. If somebody just puts a bunch of fire stopping around this, it's going to be very difficult now to actually get the wall rating built properly. So again, this is all stuff that I'd like to share and show when I do the training and the education. The other thing is, again, as mentioned, even though somebody puts details up, these are all just examples of what the system is. It calls out what the actual UL number is right here. And if you go down and read the UL detail, this number right here, WL7059, calls out a duct that's actually passing through this wall. And unfortunately, when the measurement was done, it calls out that the duct was greater than 31 inches. If you read, or 34 inches, sorry, if you read this detail right here, it calls out what the maximum duct size is, 24 by 12. Does that meet that fire stop system? Absolutely not, because now the system numbers have to match what these details are. So that's why it's so important to make sure that the installers are following the guidelines of this and of the details. All right, and then just, I only have like a couple more slides that I just want to share, but does everybody know the terminology? And I think Manoj already kind of talked a little bit about this, but this is something I definitely want to make sure everybody gets. When you look at the different walls, okay, notice they have different wall type names, okay? The biggest question I always ask to people, when you look at a smoke wall, see these two right here? Are smoke walls required to maintain a fire rating? And again, this is a question I'm asking everybody, if anybody can answer this.
It depends. Smoke barriers have a 1 hour rating in certain applications. Smoke
Exactly.
partitions do not.
Yeah.
Yep, that is correct. And again, this is why a lot of people don't know that. They hear the term smoke, and the next question I say is, if it's a smoke wall, make sure you find out, is it a barrier or partition? Exactly what you just said, Josh. Thank you. And when you do that, okay, where is a smoke barrier wall required? They're required either in hospitals or prisons. Why? Because if there's ever a fire in a building, what are people supposed to do when the fire alarm goes off? Everybody's supposed to leave the building. If you're in a prison or if you're in a hospital, can everybody just leave the building if there's a fire? No. So that's why these walls have to be built and protected properly. Does everybody know what L rating stands for? And this is another key thing, because you'll notice this right here. When you deal with a smoke barrier, in addition to a fire rating, minimum 1 hour, you also have to maintain an L rating. L rating is air leakage, okay? And if the system that you've installed or the person installed, if they don't follow the guideline of what an L rating stands for, that's going to be an issue. It doesn't meet the code requirement. So again, this is something that I put on there. I just want to make sure everybody understands that as well. And when you look at this, check this out right here. Here's a third floor, and let's say this is in a building that is requiring a smoke barrier. Look what just happened right here. The whole intent of this is this wall now, because it's a smoke barrier, has to maintain a fire rating, minimum 1 hour, and an L rating. Because if there's a fire on this side, you have to move everybody over to the other side, or versus this way, if it goes into this way. This wall has to protect everyone, because what's the leading killer in a fire? Smoke and gases. Yep, exactly. So that's why L ratings are so critical when you deal with these smoke barriers, okay? So again, that's just one of the key things that I go through, and I go through all this information. You'll notice not every wall is fire rated. And the reason I bring that up, I just want to make sure everybody understands this also. When you deal with a smoke partition walls are not fire rated, okay? But look at this note right here. This is in the code. It calls out that joints and penetrations shall be filled with an approved material to limit the free passage of smoke. If somebody doesn't use a product that's listed, and again, this is just an example of what we have. We have a new product also, this CSSSA light smoke product, which is approved for CPVC pipe. So anytime you deal with a wall that is not rated, it's just calling out a smoke wall, okay? You want to make sure you use a product that is approved, meet that. Most manufacturers have products that do that, okay? But again, a lot of times if somebody just used mud and tape around a penetration, it does not meet this code requirement. So just a heads up on that. That's one of the part of the trainings that I deal with as well. And then the last thing, what I always recommend that we do on sites, again, whatever manufacturer you folks use, we always recommend that we do mock-ups. And you'll see right here, these are different mock-up conditions, and we have the GC will actually have the drywall company build a mock-up. We'll do top of wall. You can see there's TTS product installed up there, and here's different fire stop materials installed. These are always going to list what the UL system numbers are prior to the inspection, okay? So this is when I do my training. I make sure that everybody follows the guidelines, and they make sure that they follow what the detail is and how the fire stopping has to be installed. Most important that goes on these letters is the actual UL listing. And if it's not a UL detail, we have to create an EJ, which again, I think Manoj already mentioned that. EJs are engineering judgments. That's a field condition that may not meet a UL system that the manufacturer can actually design and we can sign off on to help out with the installation. So we always want to make sure before anybody installs a fire stop material, whatever the manufacturer is, make sure they have a detail, whether it's a UL system or an EJ, okay? So that's pretty much the key. That's pretty much my information and stuff like that. And this is all the stuff that I kind of guide and help on and stuff like that. So hopefully that was helpful. If there's any questions I can answer, just please keep me posted on this. And again, if Wayne wants to add anything to this information, because again, he knows the L rating. He's been talking about this on many projects as well. So we just want to make sure we cover that. L ratings are so important when you're dealing with a smoke barrier wall. Okay. Again, thank you. If any questions, please bring them up.
If I can interject, Chris, you've been tremendously helpful on a lot of my projects by coming into the field during construction to give assistance to the contractor. So if he runs into a problem, everybody should know that Hilti is available. And I believe this is true of other manufacturers. But you've helped out where we had some odd conditions and the installers could not figure out how to do it. And you were actually able to come out and help them develop a system to do it. And then you issued the EJ to address those issues as well.
Yes, exactly. And again, great to see you, Jake. I haven't seen you in a bit, but nice to see you. Thank you for your time. And you know, that's why all I do with the company is just go out and train everybody, educate as many people as possible on site, exactly to his point, just to make sure that people are following the guidance and the guidelines of this. Because even on a job that's not getting third-party inspected, that same company could go to one tomorrow that is getting third-party inspected. All of a sudden, wait, why is this so different? They have to follow the guidelines no matter what job they're on. Even if they're not getting third-party inspected, they have to follow the systems to follow exactly the installation, always based on these code standards right here. So anything that's ASTM 2174, ASTM 1966, Edge of Slab 2307, those are all standards and code requirements that everybody has to meet. So again, thank you. Anything else I can answer, let me know.
Chris, thanks for your presentation. I have a question. I've seen on projects different ways that fire stopping is handled. I've seen some projects actually identify a fire stop contractor that, irrespective of the discipline creating the penetrations, they go back through and do all the fire stopping. And I've seen ones that are discipline specific. So the plumbing folks will do their own fire stopping of their penetrations, mechanical, et cetera. Do you see any difference or any benefit to having it done by a single entity versus letting the disciplines, or is it basically just based on how good the different contractors are at fire stopping their own stuff?
And again, that's a great point. Wayne might want to answer this as well, because he's on a project that does come into third-party installers. So when you say that, a lot of companies that are third-party fire stop installers, if they're FM 4991 approved, does everybody know what that means? A lot of times in the specs, it actually calls out that they want to have an FM 4991 company. That's one of the companies that would have the actual approval to do the fire stopping. And exactly to your point, instead of having 10 trades all trying to do their own fire stopping, now you have one company that's an expert installer that can actually do the fire stopping for everybody. So again, yes, and you probably know some of the names: Gleason Powers, Sweeney. There's a Drew Wall. There's a bunch of different companies that we work with up here that actually do that fire stopping. So again, if you need any of that information, we can help out with that as well. But exactly to your point, it's great to have a professional company that's installing properly, that follows the guidelines for all the trades. So again, if anybody else wants to answer or bring up any information on that, let us know. But thank you.
I just wanted to step in. My name is Clayton Schuler. One of the things that we're looking at, my company is Multivista. We do construction documentation, but we have a new AI system that we do 360 photographs of fire stopping and use AI to identify and prioritize areas of deficiencies. How would that overlay with sort of a contractor? Is it something that a contractor, we could work with a contractor on, or is it sort of still you do the visual inspections and then have the contractor go out and fix it?
So if you're asking me about that, and again, that's going to be up to if it's a contractor, typically when they take a project on, they'll go through and get all the details and all the systems right up front. Just to give you an example, I had a meeting. I don't know, is anybody here working on a Harvard project? Any of you design firm members? So I got a meeting with a company. I just did a big training on Monday, and I got to go to a meeting now tomorrow. We have to go do a walkthrough. There's a company that's actually, it's Splane. You folks know that. They're doing all the fire stopping for all the penetrations, all the trades. So I'm making sure that we go through all the details 100% in advance before any fire stopping products get installed to make sure that they're actually following the guidelines. And the funny thing is, I don't know if everybody can see this. These are a lot of the examples of the pictures and stuff like that. If you look at those, we have to make sure that we're finding exactly what those penetrations are. And before we do that, I have to know what the condition types are, but I have to know what the actual assembly type is. So we always have to know that first. So to your point, yes, we always make sure that if it's going to be one contractor, let's get a walkthrough done first. Then we get all the details. Let's get the submittal in. And a lot of times when somebody does a submittal, what do they usually just send in? Products. That's no good. You have to make sure you know what the details are on the job site and get the actual details, which are the UL systems or the EJs, already put in place, and they should get submitted automatically to get approved. Does that help?
Yes, yeah. I was like, I'm looking at more of the technology piece, the future of sort of how we sort of use artificial intelligence to identify deficiencies on top of layered people that go and visually inspect and take photographs. Just curious sort of how you see the future of that going as technology advances.
Again, that's a great question. So that's something, I don't know if that's something that Manoj wants to get on and answer right away, or if Wayne wants to bring up something on that as well.
Yeah, I think unfortunately Wayne had to hop off because he is at a job site. But
yep,
good question, Clayton. To be honest, this is my first time kind of hearing about that technology. I think since you mentioned it and reached out earlier, so I'm not too familiar. But from my understanding of really the dynamic of how it works with the owners and the contractors in terms of who's going to be carrying out that inspection, I think that the GC is going to be the main contact early on in the project to see if that's something that you guys can be involved in. But I'd say the owner or GC seems like they'd be the best initial contact for that. Again, I just don't have too much background on it, but it sounds like a really interesting piece of technology.
And again, to that point right there, like I always work directly with the GCs, and if they're going to have a company come in and do the third-party installation, then we make sure we work with them. And they're great because they're the ones that do automatically put all those details into play. But if it's the trades that are going to do it, I always do the walkthroughs on the job site to see what the conditions are, to help out with what the details are, if that's answering the question that you're asking.
Yeah, I'll take it offline. Maybe we can connect. I know Manoj and I have connected a little bit, but it'd be interesting to sort of see how that process works and how technology in the future is going to sort of support you in the inspection process.
Well, I will tell you one other thing too, and this is something that that Manoj can bring in with you folks also. One of the things we do have is we have also a BIM program. So we have the ability where as long as we look at all the BIM services on a project, we know the conditions, we can update all systems and details right away. So we have a group that just does BIM meetings, if that's something that would be helpful as well. Because again, that helps out with the design. So even before the job even starts, we can help out with the actual designs of the details before the project even gets rolling. If that answers your question.
Okay, yeah, I don't want to waste people's times, but I think there's technology to support the work that you guys are doing to really sort of, get to a 99.9% effectiveness. But take it offline another time. Would love to connect.
You got it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Clayton. One quick thing before we move on. Josh, you mentioned your question of, whether it's better or worse that you have a Firestop special contractor or if the trade's actually doing the installation themselves. Again, it's kind of like Chris mentioned, it really just depends on the experience. But one thing I want to touch on that is preform devices and that technology was initially pioneered so that anyone can do the installation of fire stopping. So the actual installation process is extremely straightforward. so that trades, even without having the background of fire stopping and having that deeper understanding of fire stopping, can still install to the same quality as someone who has years of experience in fire stopping, doing what the traditional method or the preformed device method. So just a bit of context on that technology. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen once again, and we can hop back in. Can you guys see my screen? Give it a thumbs up.
We can, yes.
Perfect. Thanks, Andrew. All right, so really continuing what we said, I think Wayne mentioned this earlier. If a non-compliance is identified, according to these points here, 10% of non-compliance for one specific application, inspection is halted and they have to re-inspect their work. Obviously, a non-compliant fire stop system has to be replaced or repaired. And there's no specific guidance called out for accepting of non-compliance percentage. So really, overall, Wayne talked about a lot about this. I think the big key points are the setbacks that you have if a non-compliance is updated or is identified. So really, again, using your influence as a specifier, call out specific systems early on in the process can really help with this later down the line to make sure there's as little non-compliances as possible. So that wraps up I've said media a lot, but the media section of the presentation. We're going to be kind of flying through this next section that's about the actual education behind inspector training. But any questions so far? We've had some people speak up, which is great, but I didn't see anything else in the chat, if I'm correct.
Nothing else in the chat right now, and
Awesome.
we've done pretty good with people just talking today, so
Awesome.
we'll adjust. That's fine.
All right, thanks, Andrew. Keep it rolling. Really, this is just a snippet from the IFC website. This specific section is about the IFC education program and the exam for the certification. Really, the big thing that I'd like you guys to take away is it's just a great resource. These next couple slides talk about whether if you're interested in being a special inspector and getting the education to become a fire stop special inspector. They have the content online for free on the IFC website. And like I said, free, no cost. And then you can actually pay to take an exam. I believe it's $500 to take the exam. And then if you're a government employee, it's $300. But more than anything, it's really just a great place to get an in-depth understanding of what special inspectors look for and really to get into their mindset. Again, to be the best specifier early on in the process, you're going to want to understand what they're looking for later down the line. Another thing as well, as we discussed earlier, is the owner is going to submit a submittal to the AHJ with the candidate that they want to carry out that special inspection. You can also provide information of maybe who you want to carry out the special inspection by seeing who the certificate holders are using the website link right here. But again, the main thing is just a great resource to learn more about this content. So I mentioned earlier, and we saw this acronym earlier, IAS, International Accreditation Service. Again, I think as I mentioned at the time, it's really an agency that has been accredited, and that's based on the personnel that they have and that personnel having the appropriate experience as well as certification. So as it says here, having passed either the UL or FM or IFC special inspector exam. So as I mentioned earlier, we had an objective slide. This is a summary slide summarizing the main topics that we talked about today. Again, what types of buildings are subject to these special inspections? What type of approval does the agency and or special inspector need? What exactly does that special inspection process look like? Who's paying for it and who does it impact? As you said earlier, the owner is really the one taking the payment, as well as the impact in the case that things are delayed due to non-compliances that are identified. And then lastly, we talked about the actual IFC program. Again, a resource for education. I know I flew through those last points. I just wanted to have some extra time for questions at the end because there's one last small section left. But if you guys need any more information about the IFC program, don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be more than happy to connect you and get you that content. So this concludes the AIA section of the presentation. Next, I'm going to show you a couple of examples of those preformed devices and then just talk more about how Hilti supports the office and job site. Really on that, Chris had mentioned the support he provides in the field whether it's training, walkthroughs, etc., with the contractors. Very similarly, I provide similar support, but in the office to yourselves as specifiers. So that includes specification review, especially when there's, again, these new technologies coming out. You want to make sure you have the most up-to-date products in there, so that when a general contractor or contractors looking at the spec to see what products can be approved, the newest devices and technologies can be approved, and you don't have to submit for that and everything like that. In addition to that, Firestop schedules, something I mentioned earlier, and I think I've said a couple of times throughout the presentation, having the systems early on for the general applications, listing them out, and being able to provide that to the contractor makes life a lot easier, for one, so that systems that are potentially not code compliant are not selected and then submitted and then have to be rejected and kind of go through that whole process. Again, we know that there's going to be things that come up on a job site where engineering judgments are going to be needed. And that's why we have our field support, such as Chris, as well as our other account managers and myself as well. But being able to knock out that bulk work in the beginning is extremely straightforward. After Firestop schedule, it says one-on-one consultation. It really means a similar thing. Obviously, if there's specific applications you guys have questions on, I'd be the contact for that, and we can work through to see if there's a system that exists or if there's an engineering judgment that's needed. But the Firestop schedule is really us sitting down saying, okay, what are the applications that are expected to see? What are the different materials or products that are going to be involved with that? And then I can lay out and send you guys, you'll see in the next slide what that looks like, the name of each system, that application, the rating, etc. Again, just really a good way to be able to make sure that the correct system and code compliance systems are being selected. In addition to that, as you see here, EJs, engineering judgments, BIM, Revit. Chris mentioned a little bit about BIM. If any of you guys are interested in that, let me know. It's a very in-depth topic, but I'd be more than happy to connect you with our team who does that, because we kind of see it as the future when it comes to Firestopping. And lastly, continuing education. As I'm doing here today, a big part of my role is making sure that our specifiers and everyone we work with, all the design firms we work with, are up to date on the newest technologies, as well as code relevant topics. So on the right-hand side here, it's kind of the field side or job site side of things. Again, installation training, like Chris mentioned, he's a part of pretty much everything you see here on the right-hand side. Coordination with the GCs and the trades, as engineering judgments. Before the inspector actually comes out, Chris also does a walkthrough with the trades to ensure, to his level of knowledge, whether those Firestop systems have been installed correctly, and comparing it to the actual detail, whether it is accurate or not. And then as well, product and system selection kind of goes hand in hand with the Firestop schedule, but more of an application specific direction. So this is really what that schedule would look like at a very basic level. There's many different ways it can physically look like, but this is really the information that's going to be called out on it. As you see here, first you have the type of penetrant, then you have what type of body it's going to be going through, whether it's a floor, wall, etc. Then you have the UL classification, so the actual UL system name, which again is extremely important to know. And then the product it's going to be using. Again, this can change depending on what type of manufacturer you're using. This is just a service that Hilti provides, obviously at no cost, where we can kind of help you get this knocked out early on in the process. In addition to that, we can provide this detail on the right-hand side, or sorry, left-hand side. Really, it's going to show you kind of a high-level image of what that system would look like, and then it'll reference that specific system that's called out right here. And lastly, again, in more recent years, I'd say even before I started, because I started with Hilti in 2020, Hilti's kind of shifted to trying to be a partner instead of just solely a manufacturer. And that's why things like BIM are kind of becoming more relevant, because we're getting in earlier on in the design process. But building on that, Hilti just has a ton of resources online, very similar to the IFC website. If you want to learn more about the special inspection side, you guys just are curious about Firestopping, what's relevant in the world. Obviously, it's going to be veered towards specific products that Hilti makes, but there's just a ton of general content about the Firestop world on the website. So before we wrap things up, Again, my contact information is here. I want to show you guys just 2 more examples of what a preformed device looks like for different types of applications. As I mentioned, I showed you guys what it looks like for a top track application. Another common application that we see for concrete over metal deck construction is going to be an example like this. So basically, if you have a pipe running through a floor or ceiling and you have metal deck construction, what you're actually going to do is you can mount this using these self-tapping screws on top of the metal deck. This is going to be the actual product. And again, this is an example of a Hilti product, but this technology exists elsewhere as well. Really the main thing, and similar to how I showed you in TTS or that top track application or top track product, is the fire stopping materials built in. So deep inside here, again, it's kind of hard to see on camera, but within the inner rim, it's going to be in the body right here, is going to be that fire stopping material. So again, no need for destructive testing. That exact amount is known. This is all called out on the fire stop detail that you get. So it's a very simple process. What you do is before pouring the concrete, you go ahead and mount this product on top. You have a cap that goes on top. You pour the concrete. These are actually here to identify where the product is afterwards. So if you've ever go on site and you see a product similar to this being used, you'll basically see a ton of these sticking up out of the concrete. After that, you basically just break the cap off and you can pull it off and you pop in the sleeve to cut using a hole saw through the metal deck. So basically the benefit of this is you actually don't need to pour through the concrete at all because you have that cap there inside. After the concrete's being poured, you would just see strictly the metal deck alone, and that's all you have to drill through, and then you can go ahead and run your pipe through. But again, the main concept from this is the perfect amount of fire stop is built into here. So if you have a system that perfectly matches your application using a product like this, there's not going to be any destructive testing. It's going to be a generally easier installation process, and you're going to have that consistency of quality. The last one is for edge of slab applications. This is actually my favorite because it's the easiest to install by far. So generally for perimeter fire barrier system or curtain wall applications, very similar to the pipe penetration example I mentioned earlier, is you're going to have a set amount of mineral wool, and then you're going to have your fire stop spray or sealant applied on top of it. Now, for in the past, especially with sprays, you have to account for some overspray on top of the actual concrete or flooring that's there, and that can kind of be tedious. But as well as, again, making sure the right amount of right amount of mineral wool is being installed, whether it's compressed properly, all of these factors come into play. So with this specific product, which I believe is the only one preformed device on the market for fire stopping. And Chris, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I believe that's accurate. Instead of actually having to stuff that void and then use a spray or sealant, a little more messy of a process, you actually just take this device and you stick it in that space. And then you take off these ends that tape down to the surface, but that's it. It's, again, you can see the fire stopping material inside. It comes in 3 different sizes. So you are limited to a maximum joint width of, I believe, about 5 inches. But again, no destructive testing is required for this. You can pretty much slide it within that void, take off these tape, the tape on the edges right here. You kind of see these little wings, and install it. It's kind of simple as that.
Minaj, just so you know, if you're demonstrating something, we're just still seeing the slideshow screen. We can't actually see what object you're showing us.
Oh, really? I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I wasn't sure if you realized that or not.
Oh, man. That is unfortunate. Okay, can you guys see me now?
We can see you, yes.
Perfect. Okay, so just a quick rundown again then. Again, perfect amount of material is built in here. Instead of having to stuff that mineral wool spray, you can actually just slide this unit inside the space between your curtain wall system, whatever is back there. It varies from different edge of slab applications, and then your concrete floor. So again, just really simple product, really straightforward process. And yeah, no destructive testing necessary, and makes the whole inspection process a lot more smooth. Any questions? I know it was a lot of content that we covered today, but I hope it was extremely informative. To be honest, I learned some from speaking to Wen as well, so it was great having him on there. It's those little details once you get into the field and you have a lot of experience that really builds up. So yeah, it's a really interesting topic. And any questions?
We'll keep the chat line open if people want to think about questions for a minute or two. First and foremost, let me thank you, Chris, everybody else that was participating and helping. I also got to give you guys a little bit of special credit. We were told we were expecting 35 people today. And for the first time, the number of people that I was told were going to show up, we actually hit that plus 2 more. Usually we always have a few stragglers that don't make it on. So I think everyone attended today. That was great. So yeah, we appreciate you coming on. We really like seeing the physical displays. Things like that go a long way to helping everybody visualize how we deal with these issues.
I can add something, Andy.
Please.
Wayne Barrow has a bag of tricks. Chris might embellish on it if he wants. I did a renovation in a high-rise, a 40-story building, and in the lower levels there was an expansion joint for seismic, and must have been 4 or 5 inches wide, and it was an older building, and we observed that there were some significant tears in the membrane that spanned the joint. And Wayne has one of his skills and experience is to inspect those things so we could identify a solution and come up with a way of replacing or repairing those. So if you're doing anything that requires a rather sizable expansion joint through floors, that's really a good contact to know about.
Thanks, Drake. That is good to know. We got a question just pop up from Lewis Schiller. What is procedure today? Sorry, we usually pop that up a few times. I will do that right now. Okay, for anyone that is looking for continuing education credits, I am now posting in the chat box a Google form link. It has 3 questions. You are tasked with answering 2 of them. One will be your name, nice and easy. And the second one, if you're an AIA member, just give us your membership number. If you are not, but would like credit and a certificate for this, just give us your email. Thank you for reminding me, Lewis. Anybody else want to jump on? We are at the top of the hour, but Minaj has been generous. He's not rushing off if we need another minute or 2.
This is, I'm sorry, can you repeat the AIA number issue? How do you want it?
If you're an AIA member, go to the Google form, type in your name and your AIA number. That's all you got to do. All right, with that, I'm going to stop our recording for the day.